And now the moment you have been waiting for. It is a real privilege for me to introduce our guest speaker this evening, who many of you, like myself, hear on Fridays when he guest hosts for Bill Bennett's Morning in America radio program, heard locally on 1260 AM, The Pledge. Rick Santorum graduated from Penn State University with a degree in political science, received his MBA from the University of Pittsburgh, and later earned his Juris Doctorate from the Dickinson School of Law. In 1990, in what was considered a long shot for Santorum, he became the U.S. House Representative for the 18th District of Pennsylvania and was consequently reelected to a second term. He then set his sights on serving all of Pennsylvania in the United States Senate and did so from 1995 to 2007. During his time in Washington, D.C., Senator Santorum founded the Congressional Working Group on Religious Freedom and spearheaded the passage of a long list of key pieces of legislation. But here tonight, we want to express our deepest appreciation to Senator Santorum for the key role that he played for the passage of a ban on partial birth abortion and the passage of the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. The list of accomplishments and credentials goes on and on. Senator Santorum is still hard at work today protecting America's freedom. He and his wife Karen are the proud parents of 7 children. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm West Michigan welcome to Senator Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is truly a privilege to be here with so many people who are committed every single day to upholding the first principle of American democracy, and that is the respect for human life, and that we are all God's creatures that are deserving of respect and protection under the law. So it is an honor to be here, and I want to thank all of you warriors out there who every single day go out, and I know not everyone in this room qualifies for that, but those of you, and you know who you are, who are out there every single day standing up for life, whether it's at the crisis pregnancy centers or in front of the abortion clinics, you, not Rick Santorum, not Vern Ehlers, not Pete Hoekstra, not your members of the Senate and House, you people are the folks who should be honored and should be applauded every single day for what you're doing. So would you please give those people a big round of applause? I always find it strange to come and speak to a pro-life group because I am not the most likely guy in the world. I got grilled at the table here about my history and where I came from, my wife, my family. If you want to know anything, just ask anybody at the table. They know more than they need to know, frankly. But you know, I came to this issue involuntarily, and I know Pete knows this, and Vern probably will tell you the same thing. But there's one thing about being pro-life. It's another thing to stand up and speak about the issue. And I knew that. All politicians know that. If you're in public life, it's one thing to be pro-life, vote pro-life, and be quiet about it. It's another thing to actually stick your head out of the foxhole and speak into the issue. For the first 5 years of my time in the United States House and Senate, I never said the word abortion, never entered into a debate on the floor of the House or Senate. I was an ambitious guy who knew that stepping on that landmine would be the end of any ascendancy that I aspired to. And so I sat back. I sat back and let other people take, like Henry Hyde and Chris Smith in the House, and Don Nichols in the Senate, Bob Smith, let them take the banner. I would help behind the scenes. But in a state like Pennsylvania, like a state like Michigan, I was not going to get involved in that. And it wasn't until the issue of partial birth abortion came up where I saw Bob Smith stand up on the floor of the United States Senate and describe this procedure. And I had sitting at my desk watching C-SPAN, and I said, this can't be true. Bob Smith had a tendency to put some pretty bizarre stuff in legislation, to be honest with you. And so I thought, well, this is just one of these Smith things that doesn't, and if it's true, it'll pass easily. If it's not true, it won't. And so while I felt compelled after listening to this thing to get up and say something, I thought better of it. I said, I can be more effective if I just be quiet and quietly work behind the scenes. So I did nothing. Well, the bill didn't pass. It was referred to committee, which is almost unprecedented. The bill gets on the floor to get sent back to committee. That's the only bill I can remember in all the time I was in the Senate that happened. It was sent back for hearings. And it came back, and of course, we passed the bill, but we didn't pass it with enough votes to override President Clinton's expected veto. It was at that moment, as the debate was going on in November of 1995, that I mustered up the gumption to go on the Senate floor. After listening to Barbara Boxer for about 10 minutes, so that doesn't motivate you to do something. You have no soul. But so I got to the floor, and it's embarrassing to read the transcript. I can't make sense of what I said. I mean, I was so nervous. I was so nervous. I had broken this rule that I was going to go up and talk about the A word. Well, through the power of my wife, who is not here tonight, but is here with me every time I work and talk about this issue, and the power of a lot of people praying, and my growth in my own personal faith life, within a year's time, I was managing the override of President Clinton's veto in September of 1996, where I not only was speaking, but I was in the manager's chair and conducting the debate. And from that point on, my children who read press clippings of me used to think my first name was Ultra. I was always, the conservative senator from Pennsylvania, but once you speak out on social issues, you are ultra-conservative. And so I was saddled with that. Here I am in a state politically similar to Michigan, and one that is precarious, particularly among the Republicans, is very divided among Republicans in Pennsylvania, pro-life and pro-choice. And so I, as we know from Senator Specter, and we don't need to say anything more than that, that I ended up, again, being out on the floor of the United States Senate and debating this issue, and it turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life to be involved in those debates. And the issue became not just another issue for me, but it was an issue that I felt more called to be involved in than anything else that I did in the United States Senate. And we were at a critical time on this issue in America. We look at this administration, and you look at the country. We are, and have been, fighting a war for our culture against the culture of death. Take a look at the New York Times bestseller list last week. I believe in the top 20 nonfiction novels, death, the word death, is in almost half of the novels. This is a culture of death that we are fighting. And not surprisingly, when the culture is so poisoned from our colleges and from our media and from the news media and from Hollywood and every aspect of our society purveying this lie, it's not surprising that politics, which is downstream from culture, is now full of people in Washington, D.C. that share that view of the culture of death. And so we are under assault. I would argue that we are no more under assault more foundationally than on the issue of health care. Now, everyone thinks when I say that, you think, well, that's because abortion is now going to be covered if President Obama is successful in passing his health care reform. That's part of it, but it's only part of it. Yes, abortion, we all know, Pete Verne would tell you, that abortion is in fact going to be part of that plan. There's no way that it won't be. If there's a bill that's passed that doesn't specifically exclude abortion, the courts will require it. How do I know that? Because they did it for Medicaid. Medicaid had no particular provision that said abortion was required as essential health care services, but the courts found it to be so, and that's why Henry Hyde offered the Hyde Amendment to specifically exclude it. And of course, there were attempts made in the House and Senate to do that, and they were defeated. And if you want to know, the Catholic bishops who unbelievably support Obamacare have actually come out and said that they will not support it because of this provision. If they do it, as left as they are down in Washington, D.C., then it shows you that this is real, that this is going to be covered. That's one thing to be concerned about, but actually, there's more. And it's not just the conscience clause protections, which allow providers not to have to provide abortion services or other reproductive services that are against their faith. But it is the essence of what President Obama and the Democrats are trying to do. They are trying to take a healthcare system and they're trying to make it into a government healthcare system. Ultimately, that's where this is going. That's where they want it to go. They really make no bones about it. Many of you saw the YouTube video of Barney Frank, where he was asked that question. He said, hey, look, this government option is the first step. We all know that. They deny it. But we all know that whether it's called an insurance exchange or whether it's called a government option, what we're talking about is government seizing control of the system. And you say, well, why is that necessarily going to further the culture of death? Because socialized medicine furthers the culture of death. You only need to look at the countries around the world that have government-run health care. And what you'll find is the same thing you'll find, by the way, in this country, where there's government-run health care. Look at the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration, as Pete will tell you, is funded out of an appropriation account. And every year, we underfund the VA. Why? Because they have to compete for resources with everything else. And so our veterans care is, while fine, is not as good as it can be. And what have we done? Well, we systematically exclude classes of veterans as we run out of money. And so certain classes of veterans that used to be covered are no longer covered. And the class of people they could cover get narrower and narrower. Why? Because we don't have any money. Well, what happens when everybody's in the system? How do we then exclude people if everybody's in the system? Well, what do they do in European countries? They simply don't provide care, or they don't provide care on a timely basis for people who are on the margins of society. Do you know in most European countries, children who are born who are gestational age of under 25 weeks are simply not cared for. They're simply left to die. I was in Los Angeles and gave a pro-life talk the other day, and I finished the talk and I went to the hotel and I checked in, and there was a very pleasant African-American woman behind the desk, and she was asking me all sorts of questions. I mean, I'd flown in from D.C. and it was 11 o'clock at night L.A. time, so I wasn't in the mood for a lot of questions, but she was asking them anyway. And I told her I was at a pro-life. Oh, that's really interesting. And I said, what'd you talk about? So I talked about, briefly what I said. She goes, oh, I was born, I was 1 pound, 8 ounces. I was born at 23 weeks. And I sailed. Here I am. Well, in Europe, she wouldn't be there. They simply would not provide her care. If you look, and I use an example because here we are in Western Michigan. Look at an example of the Dutch. Now you'd say, well, the Netherlands is probably the most liberal country in Europe. Well, that may be the case today. But I remind everybody that during the Nazi occupation, there was only one group of physicians who refused to participate in the Nazi doctors' experiments, who refused to do euthanasia and abortion. That were the Dutch doctors. But that changed when socialized medicine came. And the government had to balance budgets and told physicians, you have to try to reduce costs. You have to stop treating people who are not going to be living useful lives. And 10 years before the Dutch passed assisted suicide in 2001, 10 years before that, 10% of the people who died in the Netherlands died as a result of doctor-assisted suicide. Before it was legal. Of those, half of that 10% were involuntarily euthanized. Most babies who were high cost to the system. You say, well, that can't happen in America. We're different in America.